Good evening, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight, and we're excited to welcome you to our online event series, Squawkin Sports, hosted by Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. For this installment, they'll be chatting with Kate Fagan about her new book, All the Colors Came Out, A Father, a Daughter, and a Lifetime of Lessons. You're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to our hosts, Patrick and David, and tonight's featured author, Kate, for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. And we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. There's just a few housekeeping things to go over before we get started tonight. In our Zoom webinar, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and you can see a count of fellow attendees at the top of your Zoom screen. There are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. So if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program, so please make sure you put your questions there and not in the chat. And importantly, tonight's featured book, All the Colors Came Out, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to be able to offer actual shopping in our bookstore locations, 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. every day. You can purchase Kate's book and many others on site, or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the U.S. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Your series hosts for Squawkin Sports are Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. Patrick has written for many large publications you've heard of and even more small ones that no longer exist. He's a founding member of the Billings, Montana to Brooklyn sports writing pipeline. David was an editor at Deadspin and is now a co-founder and co-owner at Defector.com. His writing has appeared in The New Republic, The New Yorker, Food and Wine, and The Bachelor. We'll be speaking with featured author Kate Fagan. She is an Emmy award-winning journalist and the #1 New York Times bestselling author of What Made Maddie Run, which was longlisted for the PEN ESPN Award. She currently works for Meadowlark Media and writes for Sports Illustrated, and previously spent 7 years as a columnist and feature writer for ESPNW, ESPN.com, and ESPN The Magazine. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina with her wife, Catherine Budig, and their 2 dogs. Her new book, All the Colors Came Out, is an unforgettable story about basketball and the enduring bonds between a father and daughter forged in the love of the sport, which over time came to mean so much more. Kate is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Patrick and David and with all of you. Please take it away, Patrick, David, and Kate.
Hi. Well, thanks so much for having me. Hey guys, what's up?
Hello.
Guess I'm going to start with a reading from the book. This is actually the first that I've done, so I picked. That's right. Feel honored, I suppose, right? So for those of you who don't know, through probably a few of you, in this book about my dad, there are sprinkled throughout are little stories that he taught me on the basketball court. So kind of life lessons told on the basketball court through the game of basketball. And I'm going to read one of those lessons, actually number 6. The lesson is called Keep Your Sneakers in the Trunk. One summer when I was 10 years old, we vacationed at Bethany Beach in Delaware. On the first morning, my dad and I went out for a quick drive to see the downtown, the boardwalk. His eyes lit up as we rolled to a stop sign, and out his window, he spotted an outdoor court with what looked to be a competitive pickup game. Guys were even standing on the sidelines, waiting for next. I was sitting shotgun, peering out the window across him. He was wearing a tank top and shorts, and I watched as his tan arm cranked the wheel, quickly turning us toward the courts where he parked the car. What are we doing? I asked, unbuckling my seatbelt. Come on, let's go. He was already out of the car. Gonna see if I can catch a game. But how? You don't have your sneaks. I heard the sound of the trunk popping. And we don't have a ball. I could hear him rummaging in the back. He had this habit of not answering questions right away, making me ask them repeatedly. I got out of the car. The morning was bright, hot, and humid. You don't have your sneaks, though, I said again. Come on. He shut the trunk and turned to cut across the grass. I could see now that he did, in fact, have a pair of sneakers gripped in his right hand, and so I jogged to catch up with him. Every few months, all my life, I've had this dream in which I'm meant to be playing in a game, but I can't find my sneakers. Sometimes they're back at my house, which takes me hours to reach. Other times they're trapped inside my locker, the code to which I've forgotten. On the rare occasion I find my sneakers, I'm mystified to find the laces removed, or for reasons unknown, I spend what feels like hours trying to get them on my feet. In none of these dreams do I make it onto the court. To be haunted in this specific way, wandering around a sneakerless world, is ironic. Because after this morning in Bethany Beach, once I got old enough, I always put a pair of sneakers, laced, in my trunk. If you walked out to my car right now and popped the trunk, you'd find a pair of sneakers tucked away, just in case. I can't remember the last time this proved useful, unless you count the smiles and memories the sight of them inspires. You just never know when you'll find the game, my dad said that morning. Too many people let tiny hurdles stand between them and the thing they love doing, the thing that fuels them. The timing's not right, or the guitar's not tuned, or the light's fading. When my dad said to always keep a pair of sneaks in the trunk, he meant it literally. But he also meant that life could sometimes conspire against us, create friction, convince us that doing what we love is a hassle, not a joy. Our goal is to not let it. All right. So that is life lesson number 6 from this book.
Very nice.
Thanks,
And
Al.
look at how pretty that is.
It's a good
That's
looking
right.
book.
Very nice.
Beautiful cover.
I also have one.
Before it started, we were talking a little bit, and I was saying, I mean, this is a book about your father's death and some of this separation and rift, or I don't know if those are the right words that you had when you went away to college, some lost time, those kind of things. I said it also really bummed me out in that the 2 pickup games that I played in for 20 years have not happened in a year and a half. So like the descriptions of basketball, and I told Kate in New York they took the rims down for a while because you could. So
People
it's just
could not be trusted.
equally crushing.
Yes. So that little snippet of a pickup game and having your sneaks in the trunk, it kind of didn't scratch the itch fully for you there, Patrick?
I mean, there's something in there about the guy wearing the NBA jersey. If he is no good, I'm like, perfect. This is a man who knows.
Oh no.
Well, given how much of the book is about you kind of like, I mean, like falling in love with, and then sort of like falling out of love with basketball, the basketball writing in it is, I agree with Patrick, like totally evocative in that it made me want to go like get into a pickup game and fuck up.
Yeah.
Like like not that I like expected that I would do great in it or whatever, but I was like, oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
When like some old guy you don't know who's 6'5" that bosses everybody around out there.
I wanted to ice my knees.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit.
Put blurbs on the back, but I'm sure Patrick would let you use that.
Tell us about growing what your relationship with your dad was growing up, and particularly as tied to basketball before you went off to college. It was pretty unique, it seems, for somebody as hyper competitive as your dad to also give you the space. I thought that was really interesting and kind of not what you usually get.
Yeah, because I think maybe the assumption we have is that someone who excels, and because my dad played professionally overseas, played Division I and then professionally here, that they're going to be like a dictator maybe about the specificities of how you should behave on the court and be so focused on their child running drills and being great. And my dad wasn't like that, although he was very keen to share his love of the game with both me and my sister, who ended up not having hand-eye coordination, and my nieces and nephews. I mean, he loved sharing his love for the game, but he sort of just offered it to you, offered to pick you up if you wanted to come along, if you were a niece or a nephew, or to bring me anywhere. But he never forced it or had strict parameters about how you had to operate if you were going to play basketball. And I thought that was, in retrospect, very different than I see a lot of other parents behaving, or that I see parents behaving now, even though they probably don't want to be behaving that way. And the other thing that I thought my dad growing up that I didn't realize at the time until I got older and in sports journalism was that the amount of attention and acceptance and welcoming he gave me as his daughter, as opposed to a son, was not necessarily to be taken for granted, even though as a kid you have no alternative experience. So I just figured, oh, okay, well, any daughters who love basketball, their dads just love to bring them everywhere and love to teach them and spend time with them. So my dad and I we really spent my childhood playing basketball together. This wasn't like a once a week thing. This was hours a day until I decided to go to college, and we played together. Played pickup with him. We went and watched other high school games, scouted teams, boys and girls side. So it was really our shared passion for a long time, and the reason we spent so much time together.
And were you similar players on the court, position wise, and just sort of demeanor wise? How parallel or opposite were your games?
Our games were opposite enough because my dad was playing in like the 70s, so there's no. We're going to get in a little sports talk now, but there were like definitive positions back then, right? Like if you were 6'5" in high school in upstate New York, you were going to have a down low game at some point. So he was a fantastic shooter, but he also was more of a post player. I was never a post player. I was always a guard, but the common thread in our games, because he taught me how to shoot, was shooting. And so that was his strength on the court, and it was my strength on the court as well. And that was definitely a common bond because of his passion and him wanting to make sure that when I asked a question, he answered it with the expertise of somebody who has played professionally.
There's something interesting about the relationship that you all had, as like, because you mentioned, like, so you're constantly in his pickup games. Like, he always picked you first, starting when you were like 12 years old or whatever. And it's like, it's a very like sort of a wholesome relationship in the sense that like most of the like athlete memoirs about their parents are way darker sided than this. And your relationship was not simple, no relationship between a parent and a child is, or anything like that. But there's something really, this is going to wind up not being a question. I like the book.
That's cool.
I'm say something.
I love those. Yeah.
That'll be
cool.
What we do instead of asking the question. Is that like the dynamic of like, I mean, you competed against each other, but playing with each other and like sort of like growing into this love of the game in a way that was not sort of like foisted upon you. Like, I don't think that I've really encountered anybody that played sports at a high level that later wrote about it, who talked about having had this relationship with a parent and the game. Like, it just really feels new in that way.
Yeah, because I think that most of the time when you read about a parent-child dynamic in sports, even if there's a lot of time spent there, I don't think it's always through the lens of like, a parent who's just sharing a joy for the game, as opposed to maybe they're driving the AAU van and they're like super invested in the identity of being a basketball parent or a baseball parent or a soccer parent, and they invest a ton of time and they're dedicated. But my dad was almost a 180 from that. I mean, not that he wasn't going to AAU games, but he was much less concerned about, I think anyway, maybe there was some part of him that liked it, but he seemed less concerned about how me being good fueled his identity than he cared about the shared time of us playing together, because that shared time wasn't him running me through drills or him waiting on the sidelines of my practice and me being like, why is my parent here? It was, I was learning the game by being on the court with him. There was no, I had AAU practice over here, high school practice over here, but almost like I quote Bruce Springsteen a lot in this. And, he's got that line in No Surrender. I learned more from a 3-minute record than I ever learned in school. And I think there was something about my relationship with my dad where it was very much like that. We would play off grid, one-on-one drills and stuff that wasn't tied to high school or AAU. It was like this own experience that we had. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's different than the way a lot of kids experience sports.
Yeah. And even different than the way it's sort of sold too. Like, there's a bit in there that I really liked where you were talking about, like, you and he would shoot around at Union College. And you were like, I feel like other people are putting in more time in the gym. This is like high school you, where they're doing 3 hours in there. And he's like, well, what are they doing for 3 hours? Like, what is it? It was like a perspective, not just of like a pro, who like knew how to use his time out there, but there was something really like, I know these weren't intended as life lessons, and I want to make clear to anybody that hasn't read the book yet, they're not presented as like sort of pat things where you're like, and that's why you need to make every hour count. But there is like an element of like a sort of a wisdom to it that like it feels like good dadding. Like it's just a way to sort of like remind somebody how to be human in a way that isn't heavy-handed or self-interested.
I took a couple of notes, like, oh, I can work that in.
Yeah.
Had a dad.
Yes, as had a dad. I don't think we have a lot of Division I sports in our given her parents, but so I was curious then when you go to college and it doesn't seem like there was one specific thing. You weren't burned out on, this isn't the Andre Agassi story where, I'm going to take meth because I'm tired of hitting forehands. You just got kind of tired of the game? Did you just grow out? Because it seems like you beat yourself up pretty good about one, going off to college, and two, kind of falling out of love with basketball, even though it's not given that your dad would have been upset about. I'm sure he would have been upset on some level, but it seems like you took that burden on yourself because you just kind of didn't like playing anymore. Is that fair to say? Or
I think that when you do grow up with a parent who has been great at something, no matter how much they try to give you the freedom to find your own things that you're passionate about, that come to you naturally, that you're naturally drawn to, it's a challenge to find the space to find those things. Because I wanted to spend time with my dad, and every night he was going to play pickup and he wanted me to come. So I wanted to come. And so I think that what happened was that I came to love basketball with a lot, not just because of the game, but because a lot of the peripheral things that were attached to the game. It was a way to spend time with my dad. It was a way to become great at something that I kind of had a head start on because I had this professional who was like, keep your elbow in, follow through like this. So there were all these reasons why I loved basketball. And then when I went to play Division I at the University of Colorado, now all of a sudden I have like the pressures like ratcheted up. And I don't have my family. So there's not the structure of that. So I think that I think when I fell out of love with basketball, it was possibly because it wasn't my passion to begin with, but this thing that I loved in a way because of the circumstances of my upbringing. And I didn't realize I wasn't obsessed with it like my dad was until I was put in a pressure cooker situation, like on a scholarship at Division I. But I think that my falling out of love with it really, he wasn't upset or mad at me. I think he was just sad that this thing that we always did together, that he thought we could always keep doing together, I didn't want to do it as much anymore. And we struggled to find a thing to replace that we could plug in and spend X amount of hours doing, and we both were invested in it. We never quite found that thing again.
And did going off to Buffalo, Colorado,
who are the Buffaloes?
Colorado,
so you did
Buffaloes,
a good job.
yes. Did you ever land on whether he was disappointed that you went that far away? The book to me reads more like that was something you put upon yourself that may not have been entirely the case. I can see you didn't want to play at the University of Albany or something, but there just seems like you kind of took it upon the weight you took on that just for going so far away was more your own, or am I wrong on that?
I think that in the book, I do, because I do this in real life, I do take on responsibility for things. Not that it changes my behavior all the time, but I will take on responsibility for like regrets that I have or decisions I made that I think I could have taken other people more into account. And so I think you're reading correctly in that the book, I try to explore all of those things, even if the people in my life weren't upset about something, but I feel weird about it. This particular decision for me to go to the University of Colorado, I know my dad was, whatever upset means, he was sad that I had taken myself so far away. He was okay if I'd gone somewhere like on the Southeast, if I'd gone to like a Richmond or something that he could have driven down and seen games. So this was a thing he actually was, because we talked about it later. He actually genuinely was upset. Although once I'd gotten and played at the University of Colorado, he understood the decision. He thought it was a good decision, but I think he was always a little sad that I took that experience away from him, this shared playing college basketball and him being, the proud dad.
There's something I have not had the experience of losing a parent that you had in this. And I think this is the other part. As much as there is good basketball writing in this book is about grief and loss, which is not to say that it's not, an enjoyable book to read. It really is. I think you have insights into it, but the part of that sort of rang true, and you do this, I think, very thoughtfully in a bunch of different chapters. Like, there are things that you can't control in a situation like this, that like your father got a terrible disease, and, there's nothing that you can do in a situation like that. And yet I know that when I've been in similar situations in my life, I tend to super laser focus on the few things that I feel like I can control and tear myself up about them, because I think what you're really mad about is what you can't change. And there's something, it's really interesting to me, I think, for the various different types of loss that I'm still sort of working through in my own life in terms of reading this book. I think that it's very close to the surface how you are sort of feeling all of this. Like, where were you emotionally in the process of writing? Like, when were you writing it? And like, it seemed like this was very close to when your father actually passed that you started doing it.
Yeah. Well, I
think
during
we have not mentioned your father died of ALS.
Yeah.
If anyone has not, which I'm not an expert on, but just looking into it a little bit for the book, seems like as bad a way to go as diseases get.
Yeah. So ALS, which is more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, it's a gradual shutting down of the muscles, and it progresses differently for different people, whether, you might lose your one arm first, but it's the muscles that we think of, right? Like the ability to hold something, the ability to stand, but it also will progress to swallowing, your swallowing muscles, your lungs, your heart, all of those things with ALS eventually shut down. So that was the disease we were dealing with, which I think is crucial to the book, because it introduces these different dynamics of caretaking and decision making about how and when to extend life, because it's a disease that, we see Steve Gleason, former saint, living with ALS, and he had a tracheostomy, and so he could live for decades because he's on a breathing machine. So I think the disease is crucial in that it does introduce different decision making for our family that different other diseases might not introduce. They might introduce different decision making, but not the same as what ALS introduces. And as for writing the book, David, you're exactly right in that if it feels fresh, it's because it was fresh when I wrote it. And I think I wanted to do that because the day after my dad died, me, my sister, my mom, we opened up Word doc and we wrote like a free word association, everything we could think of with my dad. Just, whether it was a memory or a thing he did or a song he loved, and we filled it up. So we had like 1,000 words on it. And it was really that experience the day after he died that made me feel very quickly afterward that writing was going to be a way to honor him and to process what had happened. And so it was about 2 months after he died, when my mom was down here in Charleston, South Carolina, where I live, and I asked her if she thought Dad would be okay with it and if she would be okay with it. And she was like, I think he would love it. I think he'd be honored. And so I started writing it about 3 months after he died.
And it's worth noting your mother's foreword is pretty great also.
It's excellent.
It
really is good.
It was good. I and a totally different voice.
Say more, because there's a high possibility she would be on this Zoom call.
I think I saw her on here. Hi, Mom.
Yeah, that's good.
You can write your own version. I was curious though. It's a pretty stylistic book. This is not a straightforward. Then this happened. Then this happened. Then this happened. Do you sort of bleed it out all on the page and then rearrange the pieces? Did you have to start thinking of it in terms of actual from the book writing as the experience you just had? But as a writer, you do have to kind of think of things, reshape everything. Was that happening while you were doing it, or was that you got a bunch out and let's just start over? And
it's definitely stylized, because the first draft I turned in, I wasn't worried about even really having any kind of narrative. I kind of was thinking of it like every chapter could be standalone, but my editor and my mom who was reading it and other people were like, I think some stylized is good, but there should be, even though it's not chronological, like there should be some building of, tension and suspense. Not that we don't know the outcome, but that like the pressures that I'm feeling, that our family is feeling. So I rearranged a lot of stuff to try to, and wrote through a lot of things on the second draft to try to make it a little bit more of an arc. But even like the placement of the life lessons through basketball and like the order of chapters, the book really is just, whenever the deadline was for it to be done, that's when I stopped messing with the chapter order, because it's just like we all remember making, mixtapes in high school, and you could convince yourself any order of tracks is the most artistic way, until at some point you just have to decide, you just have to settle on whatever order you have it in.
Where does Boys to Men go? Do you want Boys to Men?
Always the third song.
There you go.
Always the third. On bended knee, absolutely number 3.
There's humor here.
I love being a 90s kid. That's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there which to me, like, instantly, as somebody who grew up, further south, but you mentioned Tim McCarver as a Mets broadcaster, which is something that you really like have to be within a couple of years of my age to even remember him as such, instead of being the, like the national guy who is like sort of falsely picking pitches and everything like that.
Yes.
It was nice that you pulled out the one Met. There's literally one line on the Mets, and Dave found it, pulled it out,
he found
thought about
it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about it for about 20 minutes.
If that's okay, I do have a few questions on McCarver. I have some Timo Perez material that we can go over later.
Well, actually, Dave, do you know Noah Syndergaard picked the book for his book club? So I feel like I have a big...
I didn't even know Noah Syndergaard had a book club.
He does have a book club, but I thought all the
does.
books were like the life-changing power of only eating meat. Like, I didn't know that he was like actually on the literary memoir side of things. Respect.
Yeah, well, yeah, he is this month.
Yeah. Then after that, it's back to like the all heart diet. Noah Syndergaard.
That's right. That's right. But continue with your X's and O's Mets question. I got you here.
I'm absolutely not going to subject anybody viewing or potentially viewing in the future to that.
Can I ask you something? This is something I never considered, and I say something I never considered as a straight white guy who spent 17 years in Catholic school. But coming out stories, I assume you hear like we never told dad or we never told mom because there would have been complete rejection. So one parent kind of knows, keep it secret. There's obviously plenty of stories where people have come out and it went terribly. And unfortunately, there are now a lot of stories where it's common and accepted. I had never considered that you didn't come out in the, if I would get this wrong, I apologize, but you didn't come out to your dad, not because you were so worried about rejection in the present, but more sort of a bit of a repudiation of the past of your childhood. I just thought that was like a fascinatingly complex thing that I had never thought of, and for obvious reasons. Yeah,
there's probably 50 reasons why I didn't come out to my dad. It's I came out to my mom, and I don't know if I said outright that she would be my messenger for me or if it was just understood, but that was sort of the chain of command that I probably or hoped, because I didn't want to have to say to my dad, and this was 2003, I think, maybe 2002. There was probably a lot going on. I mean, there was a lot going on. Like, some of it was that I had spent the previous year in college when I was trying to figure out who I am. I had started seeing someone. I had spent that previous year just like lying about everything I was doing all of the time. So there was some of that just like very acute, wow, I now am going to have to face up to the fact that like everything I've said for the last year is not accurate. And there was a lot of fear wrapped up in that. But I think that the biggest piece of it was just a lack of ability to be vulnerable about my dad. And that is where all of the layers came in, which was, this was 2002-ish. And when we were growing up, I mean, there's tons of stories of this, but like I can distinctly remember like a Saturday Night Live skit that was the women's basketball coach's fashion show. So you can imagine what this SNL skit was like. And I just remember like certain things happening along the way where me thinking, okay, I'm making these connections to the fact that a lot of female athletes are gay. Clearly a lot of women's basketball coaches are gay and saying that they're not. And so I had this like I had this very spider webby connection of like, of he's going to think basketball made me gay. And then he's going to think that he shouldn't have let me play. We shouldn't have had that childhood together because maybe it's part of the reason why I'm gay. And so that was certainly all layered into my decision to tell my mom and have her be, at the time, I thought it was the bearer of bad news. Obviously, I don't feel that way now. But during that time period, I certainly was presenting to everybody as a thing that they had to overcome to love me anyway. So it's tricky for me now to try to get back into the headspace of that because I'm so far from that.
Yeah, well, it's also somewhat amazing. My daughter went through, they had a social justice run, and her class was LGBTQ. So they made posters, and it's this one. And
there it is.
I will cop to, I was somewhat unaware of the new colors, and she's 10, and she explained to me a couple of them that I wasn't aware of. And I was just thinking, my God, things have moved, for all the shitty things that are going on now for trans athletes in particular, but just as a societal thing, because what you're talking about, it seems like ancient history, but it wasn't that long after Ellen was on the cover of Time. And that was like the biggest, will her career ever recover? Yes, it did. But it was nice having that in my head that some things are getting much better, at least in certain circles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that, well, at least I think that the places I live and the places I put myself are certainly, light years better than they used to be. I think, like, as you alluded to, I think some of the, what I call like the dark energy that used to exist and come after like lesbians and gays is now morphed and going after, trans rights. But I think that I still, even though I don't think that dark energy, I think it's dark energy. I don't think that dark energy is as big as it used to be. So that's not to say
there's
it's
at
just
least
more.
a lot more people pushing back.
Yes. Yeah, that's probably a better way to say it. Yeah.
It's kind of a writerly question. I'm changing gears a little bit on this. So I think I sort of asked this a little bit before, but from the experiences of me sort of trying and mostly sort of pulling back from writing about loss, this again, happening very close to the time that this happened. The times that I've been in similar positions, I have sort of tried to do it, just opened a doc, messed around, and found it much too hot to touch and sort of never finished anything about it. I think in this case, I know that like the pat answer is that this helped you process and helped you heal and XYZ. I wouldn't ask you to say that if you didn't feel it, but how did writing this book help you or not help you come to terms with, how angry, how sad, and how sort of cheated you clearly felt by what happened to your dad?
I think it's complicated because I think although it wasn't a main motivation for writing the book, one small reason why I did write the book was that going into the last year of my dad's life and going into the part of ALS where he was, could no longer, was in a wheelchair and like had to have a feeding tube and couldn't eat. Going into that, the only media I had consumed about that experience was like a Tuesdays with Maury,
right?
Or whatever, there's like the Four Agreements or the whatever Lifetime Hallmark movie. And I definitely entered that experience with my dad thinking that the goal was for him to get to a very philosophical, Zen-like, peaceful place of beautiful acceptance. Like I really wanted that for him. I thought, I don't know, maybe it was more for me because then it made me feel better. If he was in a good place about ALS and dying, then I would feel better. So coming out of the experience with him, I felt that there was so much that had happened within it and so many things I'd thought that made me feel like I wasn't a great human if I'd been having these thoughts and the way I would feel in certain moments. I was like, I don't think that I've read enough books that feel like they help explain the experience I just went through, from the caretaking to the, to my dad being a wonderful patient in a lot of ways and sometimes a complete asshole.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the motivation of the book, separate from I want to process the loss of my dad. I don't know how much of me writing the book was me trying to process the loss of my dad. I don't think that I was consciously thinking that. I think I thought I had something to say. So I think it's the easy answer, like you said, is I want to help people and I wanted to process the loss of my dad. And that is all true. But in addition, like, I just thought I had something new to say about the experience. Not like no one's ever said it before, but I hadn't read it in the specifics of my experience, like a Title IX kid and a dad and a daughter, and the details of it that I felt like could be universal for like people of not just my generation, but for people who maybe hadn't seen that story reflected back at them yet.
Yeah. I thought the Tuesdays with Morrie stuff was really good and really like essential. Like it rhymed with my own experiences with it, but like, of course, somebody that's sick and like in pain and sad is going to be a son of a bitch half the time. Like, who would not be? Like the idea of it, I think that's a necessary corrective, and it's good that it's in there. Like, I don't know, again, it's not something that you added, it's just what you experienced. But again, I think it's like a contribution to like this whole canon of the saddest type of literature there is.
Something, there's two things I really took from this book. And I guess the weird thing about doing this show is we have a few repeat viewers, but almost every time it's new. So I feel like this has to get recentered. My dad died of cancer about a year ago this week, surrounded by my brothers, my stepsisters, his wife, in the house, my old whiskey swilling Jesuit uncle. It was sort of as nice and kind of the thing that you hope you get somewhat in the movies. Then in January, my mom died of COVID. It was just me in a hazmat suit, which a thing you can't even really dream up. And two things I got out of your book. One, I felt really bad for you kind of worrying about whether you were doing it right. Like, and I'm like talking about, am I playing a role in a movie? Am I doing this like by the things? One, it's that as a writer's kind of brain, you're always sort of processing the thing as it happens, for good and bad. But you really show one, you can't really plan for it. Even the way my dad's was, it was the middle of COVID. We had to fly home in COVID. We had just come out of Brooklyn Hospital Spring, and then my mom's came out of nowhere. So you really do, I think you're talking to yourself almost to explain, one, you can't really plan for it to go any way you want, good or bad. And two, you capture a lot of the details of like, a lot of the stuff is just, these little details, like they had to move your dad at one point. Like things like that are the things that really kind of, you don't know anything about. You don't know like, oh, all of a sudden you can't eat this thing, or, they can't stay awake. For one of the things with my dad in his last one, before he didn't leave the bed, he kept trying to stand up and he would just fall straight to the ground. Like nobody tells you that. So you have to hold him up this whole time. You have to like prop him up, and he was kind of, built like me. So just all of a sudden you have to jump in there, and details like that, I think, are what are really valuable about this book. Like, I think there are probably plenty of emotional, philosophical, whatever, how to deal with death kind of things. But I don't think I haven't read anything, and I also will admit I haven't read a ton of them, but I have been reading them. Just the details of the stuff you can't plan for, and the stuff you can either fix at the moment or not fix at the moment. That is a lot of what the whole process is, and it sucks, but you got that, and I appreciate it, and I think others would too.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I think the idea of trying to, even not as the primary caretaker, right? Like helping my mom, who's the primary caretaker, and just being blown away by, like you said, the things that no one tells you, the things that happen that you're like, oh, this is never part of the scene in the movie that they, so until you're living through it, you don't you don't realize all of like the edges of such an experience that kind of blindside you. And I think this is not exactly off of that, but I think when you think about uh, your body and loss and health, you know, this thing we say all the time, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to work out, it's like, just be grateful for the body that you have, right? That you can move your body at all is a blessing. And I think that obviously it's a very good universal like belief system that I think all the time when I'm working out. But the strangest thing has happened since my dad dealing with ALS and then him dying is that like I get very caught up in very specific things. Like the one thing he would say all the time is like, he'd say, "You're so lucky to just be able to smush a pillow to the proper depth." Like it feels like it for me, it's a much more crystallizing way of the same like kind of tropey thing of like, just be grateful you have a body that moves. Whereas I'm actually now every time I get into bed, if you actually pay attention, it's like, man, you have to move a lot to like get a pillow to be comfortable. Like these small, tiny things that if you are a healthy person, you don't even think of. And losing them is actually a huge blow to quality of life, even though you never even, I don't, you know, most people aren't thinking about the shape that they make their pillow. So that's just one small thing that I feel like that helps illuminate this kind of universal, what is it? Like a maxim that we live by.
Well, you also had the other thing I think that's important you addressed, and Barbara Ehrenreich, I think it was Barbara Ehrenreich, basically wrote a whole book about this. Especially when we talk about ALS, it has a 100% fatality rate. But on the one hand, you're trying to get your dad to kind of, you say surrender, but that at one point you say it's a gathering, not a giving up, which that really got to me. But the idea of also, having to deal with people telling you just have a positive attitude or just, this and that is, I understand why it happens. But man, if that could just be like, if that could be cut off from anybody who's having to deal with any of this, you don't like have to be negative, and no one wants you to call and be like, are they dead yet? But you can say things like hope for the best, but that is just this sort of American mantra. Like if you chin up and, and your dad couldn't actually lift his chin, like literally stuff like that. And you take a big chunk of that to try to explain it to your dad, but also kind of let others know that isn't really helpful.
Yeah. I think my dad was kind of, because I think he was whatever brave means at the end. I thought he handled this disease so beautifully in so many ways, but he had just enough of that kind of like bitter anger to make me appreciate his humor and his resilience in the other times, rather than just turning himself into one or the other. And like, I thought that really hit home for me, was his like ability to keep his sense of humor, to keep those other things, even while he'd still lose his shit sometimes and be bitter and say things that you wouldn't. But anyway, my point being that I thought that because of the quote unquote character he was, and he hated this with this disease, the idea of silver linings, like kind of what you're getting at, like this idea, like, well, I don't know, maybe there's a lot of good coming from this. Like he just never got to that place. And I don't think I think too often, it's my experience has been with disease and loss. Too often people either say nothing at all and don't ask about it, or just speak in like false positivity / tropes, because the middle ground of saying something but being very specific and intentional, I think is very scary and terrifying for people. And it's hard to live in that place. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Can I ask you both a question? And Dave, you can answer first. How did this book play to you? I guess Kate, even more as a reader, even though you wrote it, I know that doesn't exactly make sense, but how did this book play to you, having all taken place right before COVID? I mean, we're talking 3 months, 4 months before, I'm just curious how this read, or how you think it was different to you reading it now, when we have 600, that whatever the hell number we're at.
Yeah, I mean, too many. But I think that for me, again, like as a reader, and like, I think that there's this kind of mass processing of loss that is sort of happening, but is happening, characteristically for the way that things work and don't work in the country is happening in this kind of backhanded way where it's like, if it's happening sort of despite itself. And there is that little bit that Kate was just talking about, in which she writes really well about in there, of this idea of like every bad thing that happens to you, there's this idea that you sort of have to instantly retcon it into like, actually it was a gift because it taught me like X, Y, and Z. And I think that like this was a terrible, wasted, sad year in every way to me. And I think that in terms of, I mean, the numbers of it are staggering, you know, like your experience of it, Patrick, is so much more, you know, immediate and different. And of course I know people, you know, who lost people that I cared about from my youth died of it. But I think that there's something about the immediacy of this as like, you know, a smart, loving kid's experience of this terrible thing told straight that is like, I think kind of cuts through the idea of having, there's this tendency to think of it all as sort of as politics. It's like big numbers and, you know, advantage and polls and all of this shit. Whereas like really, this is just a massive national moment of grief. And I think that like, there's something really that I found very affecting in the book, but then also I think very much possibly useful to other people in terms of grounding that in, you know, what loss actually is, you know, and then that is just imagining it 600,000 times happening to 600,000 different families, you know, which is really what we're actually talking about. I think that this book would have hit heavy no matter what, because you wrote the hell out of it, Kate, like, and it's a, you know, a great story, empathetically told. At this moment, it landed very much harder for me, I think, for that.
Yeah, I think, well, my mom's forward, I think, alludes to this idea of gratitude for the fact that we were allowed my dad's death pre-COVID for all of the reasons that mattered in a way we didn't know. Our ability to be there, our ability to say goodbye, our ability to have a gathering and celebrate his life. These were all things that, you know, as my mom writes, like we took for granted. I took for granted even through the start of writing this. And even, I would say I wrote most of it in the first few months of COVID. And and at that point, I didn't think COVID was going to be happening for a year and a half plus. I thought, but, you know, like most of us did, it was going to be like a couple week thing, but then a couple month thing. But I think, so it's hard because it came out during COVID. So it seems like it has to be placed in somewhere like, well, how will people experience this in this time, now that we know that, you know, being grateful for these things wasn't something necessarily that we were top of mind. But I think ultimately, I don't think it will exist in that framework. You know, just because you write a book, you hope that it has like a long life of existing outside of it. And I think that the space that we're in now, I don't think, hopefully if someone picks up this book 10 years from now, they're not thinking of it like, well, how does this relate necessarily to how we feel after COVID? I hope there's some sort of universality in it, separate from the time period in which it was released.
Yeah, I think in many ways, not having that be a part of the context helps towards that end. I think just because this is, I mean, you know, it's a terrible thing, but it's a thing that happens all the time. It's normal. You know, it doesn't have that sort of suspended animation context of the last year.
One thing in the book, you talk about part of your own struggle and thing you had to come through was sort of juggling your ESPN job. You were really trying to get to the top, and whatever that means. You're not giving your wife enough time, not giving your family enough time. You're probably not giving yourself enough time. But you say at one point something basically like, what's my cloud score? You're like, how many copies of, I guess the book before this you had sold, you know, how many Twitter followers, all that sort of thing. Have you moved on from that? I mean, a book comes out, you want it to sell, especially something that's personal. Have you actually, and in part, it seems like some of your wife's beliefs, her yoga-esque worldview has helped a little, but have you moved on from that? Are you going to be checking Amazon, you know, counts on this one? Is it something you can get past if it's this personal?
I think like anything that you struggle with, I fall into periods of time where I'm too much looking at Twitter and Instagram and, rankings and stuff, but
Not us.
Couldn't be
not
me,
you
but
guys.
I guess I understand what you mean by that.
Theoretically,
Yes,
you
one
can imagine
could if one
yes.
were online. No, go on.
So when the book first came out, of course, because it's this personal story of my family and me and my dad that I care about regardless of whether it sells, that I'm proud of regardless. But in those first couple of weeks, I was like, refresh, because it's your livelihood as well, and you want to sell copies to make your publisher happy so you can keep writing. But I tried to pretty quickly. I don't know how quickly it was, about 2-3 weeks after the book came out. Like, I haven't looked since then. I deleted some apps off my phone
Good.
2 weeks ago, just because I'm like, this is all part of the bullshit I'm writing about in the book. And I can't let this book of my dad coming out suck me back into like obsession with success culture and metrics and all that. So I've been pretty good about it the last couple of weeks, and I'm happier for it, not shockingly.
Can I ask a question about Meadowlark? I know that we're talking about the book, but this is the
Yeah.
other big thing that you've been a part of in this last year, is you guys started up basically your own new company that is trying to do things in a new way. How has the experience been for you all so far?
And who's
Yeah.
Right.
who's
Assuming
behind
that
it?
other people are not
Yeah.
spazzes about this.
So-
already, but go ahead.
I like that Dave gave me credit for like being a part of the starting crew.
Well,
I guess
it's like me
I'm
being
like
part of Defector. Like I write 2 blogs a week and do a podcast. Anyway, go.
So Meadowlark is a company that was originally formed, was like January, February of this year, by John Skipper, the former president of ESPN, and Dan Lebitard, who is a radio host who left ESPN. Both left ESPN, started this Meadowlark media company. And I joined up maybe about 6 weeks after they launched it. And there's about 12 to 15 of us right now. And it's fun in all of the ways that a startup is fun, and also all of the ways that startups are hard. It's hard, just, things that you want to get done now, like at ESPN, you have 12 people to do those things, to say, okay, well, we have to book a restaurant for the team meeting. Now it's like, oh, okay, I guess John Skipper's doing it. I mean, like, we went to our first meeting and he had to rearrange the tables, and like John Skipper, who, anyone who knows ESPN, or maybe this is a little inside baseball. So baseball, Dave.
Yeah. Great.
He's like this.
We're back.
We're back. He's like one of the most powerful men in sports, and he's like rearranging the seating structure at our first meeting. So it's
What all do you guys have going on? Podcasts?
Yeah, we have podcasts. We have like an audio network anchored by Dan Lebitard and Stu Gatz, and they already have 4 or 5. And we have like a $50 million DraftKings deal, and they're sponsoring and also selling against all of that audio and podcasts, and they're bringing more into that universe, and we're starting more of them. And then separately, we're taking pitches for like doc projects, mostly nonfiction now, but we want to move into scripted to be able to have John Skipper and other people like go out and sell them. So we're sort of like a production company, but we want to do it a little differently with how we structure like the deals of it. But that is not my language right there. I'm like writing, telling stories for them.
Can I ask you, we're coming close to the end. This is pretty heavy. And this is kind of heavy, but it's my favorite part of the book. If you want to save it for the book, I understand, but if not, I would love for you to close on the Guinness story.
Oh, the Guinness story. Are you a Guinness drinker?
I
Either of
mean,
you?
No.
You
are
have
you
to
a
be.
drinker?
Come on.
I mean,
Patrick Sauer.
put something in front of it.
Yeah.
Yes, not exclusively.
He's dabbled.
They haven't got you on an exclusive contract yet.
I
sole
am
provider.
I am a free agent across all boards, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I bought things that looked rainbowy.
Nice.
I really hope that.
It's about reps. He's a volume guy.
I hope.
Yeah.
I hope this Neon Lights does not get milkshake
He's
duck by the end of this show. But yes, the Guinness story. Can you tell it?
Well, so the week I went home when my dad was going to get the tracheostomy, which is the tracheostomy, you go on a breathing machine and it takes your voice as well. And my dad already really couldn't eat or drink, but he would occasionally take sips of things. But once you have a tracheostomy, that's gone. So the week I got home, and this was a very dad-like thing, he and my mom had decided that the night before he went in for the trach, he wanted to film a little like commercial for Guinness, where he kind of had a little script written out, and it was essentially like, if you could only drink one thing and it was the last thing you'd ever drink, what would it be? And he's like, and I choose Guinness, Slanger. And then he takes a sip of Guinness. And so we recorded this video for him the night before. There was some hiccups in the video. He coughed a lot on the sip of Guinness, but I have the video on my phone. No one has watched it.
I still think that's the retirement program. I mean, that's your retirement right there.
That's right. That's right.
Keep it until
pull that gold. Pull that
gold.
Yes. That's right. And then I can sell it for millions to Guinness.
That's right. Did you say that you have not been able to watch it? I have a similar video for a friend, and I'm never going to delete it, but I don't know what would possibly move me to watch it either.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a sad book, but you wrote the hell out of it. It really is.
Thanks, Dave.
And there is fun. There's fun in there, and the basketball.
There's fun.
I want to make sure that that's just because me and Patrick are a bunch of mopes doesn't mean that it's not like she's delightful to be around. Like,
speak for yourself. This is Neon Lights, hazy IPA. Speak for yourself, Dave. A party over here. I want to say quickly, our next event, July 15th, will feature this book.
Oh,
yeah.
Glory Days, the summer of
Bruce Springsteen on that cover. He's making a crazy face.
Oh, Springsteen's on that. Oh, that's the Born in the USA.
The summer of 1984 and 90 Days That Changed Sports and Culture Forever, from L. John Wortham. I want to show shirtless Johnny Mack is in this book.
Woo, my goodness.
All right.
Although he thinks
but that's what peak performance looks like.
I mean, he thinks we're going to talk about the book, but do you see on 60 Minutes, he got to go in Prince's vault? They wouldn't allow cameras in there, but he got to wander around Prince's vault.
John Wertheim or John
McEnroe? John Worth.
Oh, yeah.
John Wertheim, not John McEnroe.
No, that's probably
John
better.
McEnroe.
I agree.
So that we'll do 5 minutes on this and then just have him describe
and then Prince.
everything.
Yes.
Rex Chapman will actually be hosting that one. Look, you heard my thoughts, and having been through a lot of terrible shit, this book really meant a lot. You should buy it, and know that it is ultimately a celebration of life. And I don't have Guinness, but here's to your dad.
Yeah, right.
Here's to my dad.
Yep.
Here's to everyone.
Got my mom right there.
Thanks for being with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Here's you. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.
Take us out, Katie, please.
Thank you all for that fantastic discussion, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Don't forget to buy your copy of All the Colors Came Out in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.